The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to APS Webinars. The title of today's webinar is Effective Communication with Online Tools. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. APS membership gives you easy access. Peter, can you advance one? Thanks. APS membership gives you easy access to valuable career information and resources such as this webinar. It allows you to get your research out to the community and network with potential employers or colleagues at our meetings, have a greater positive impact about issues that are important to you through grassroots advocacy, and find a community of like-minded folks through participation in our forums, divisions, and topical groups. If you are not yet an APS member, and you don't have to be in order to access these webinars, but if you're not and you value the things that APS provides, we do encourage you to consider joining today. You can go to aps.org/membership for more information on how to join. Next slide, please. So today's presentation features Peter Fiske, lovely Peter Fiske, who you see right there, who I will introduce in more detail in a second. But I first want to do just a little bit of housekeeping. The first portion of our broadcast will be Peter's presentation, and then we will have a period of Q&A at the end. If you would like to ask a question, please type it in the questions panel located on the right side of your screen on your GoToWebinar panel. You can submit questions or responses through this panel at any time during the webinar, and we will see them and flag them for discussion at the Q&A period. You can also open and close your GoToWebinar panel with that little orange arrow that's up in the the upper left-hand side of your GoToWebinar panel. So you can see it, it's shown in the slide, but you can toggle that open and closed. You can also adjust your computer audio, phone, all of your audio settings with this panel as well. A link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after today's event, and it will also be made available on the webinar homepage. It will take us 48 hours for the video upload. And also, when you leave the webinar today, there will be a survey that you can take. We'd really appreciate it if you take a couple minutes to give us feedback so that we can improve our ability to provide you with these services. Also, before we dive in, I do want to mention a couple of broadcasts remaining in our summer webinar series, which is winding down soon. We have a broadcast on graduate program and student success, a holistic approach, which is coming up on August 19th. We also have a career in science policy webinar that's coming up in August. And I will also mention that Peter, and we'll have an announcement about this on our next webinar broadcast, but Peter's also going to be doing a webinar on successful careers in national labs. If you want to pursue careers in national labs. Yay! So we're really excited for more great content from Peter. I also want to, so an announcement of that will be coming up, and we'll also broadcast it to the summer webinar series list. I do want to mention also very quickly, in the fall, starting in mid-September, we're launching a new webinar series, Success in Industry, Careers. And basically, this will focus on different strategies on how to prepare for successful careers in the private sector. You will be getting information about that soon, either through the summer webinar mailing list or the main webinar mailing list. So just stay tuned for that. It's coming up. Okay, and now let me introduce Peter. For those of you who have been on previous, Peter has done a series of great webinars for us over the summer on entrepreneurship, and he is going to continue doing some great webinars, including this one. Peter is the Executive Director for the National Alliance for Water Innovation, a coalition between labs, universities, and U.S. water companies committed to developing game-changing technologies to enable distributed desalination and water reuse. And Peter is a seasoned entrepreneur and serial entrepreneur and seasoned senior executive. He is also an excellent public speaker and career coach. Peter has done a series of workshops for us at the APS March meetings for several years, always highly popular, very highly rated. He is also the author of a book, Putting Your Science to Work, which is one of the most popular career-focused books for folks who are in the sciences. And I've known Peter for nearly 10 years, and we've worked together on a lot of these initiatives. So I'm really happy to
That's
welcome you.
right.
Take it away, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Well, hi, everybody. We are back for our fourth in our summer workshop together. And I am happy to be with you here today. The topic of today is effective communication with online tools. And we'll be talking about exactly what we are doing now, which is how do we maximize this platform for communicating with each other and how to do that with maximal effect. And to give you a brief recap, in our previous workshops, we've talked about everything from entrepreneurship and analyzing your customer segments and value propositions and using some of the tools of business to maybe better focus yourself on your science. And last time we spent some time talking specifically about making persuasive arguments, how to shape your pitch. And in that communication, we talked a little bit about a general thing that scientists and physics trained people do, which is focusing more on technical content and logic and underemphasizing relationship building and connecting. And we described this as system 1 and system 2. This was the research of Dr. Daniel Kahneman and his colleagues, Nobel Prize winner in economics, who has theorized that how we think is largely how we receive and communicate with one another. And so learning the tools of neuroscience and learning the tools of psychology can help you as a technical communicator be more effective and communicate your messages with more clarity and more impact. We talked about several issues. One was that it's common for people to assume that there's only one type of audience member in a technical talk and they're interested specifically only in the technical content. We noticed that technical communicators commonly focus on facts and figures, and they tend not to focus very much on delivery and tone, and that very few scientists use storytelling as a device for helping convey complex technological subjects and how to connect with their audience. So that was in last week's webinar, and the recording is out there if you want to review that. But we're going to go now to the next phase, which is dealing with this issue that we're dealing with today. I will say that in general, my belief is that science-trained people can be outstanding communicators. And by combining technical excellence with warmth, confidence, and engagement, you will be an extremely compelling speaker, an extremely compelling job applicant. You'll be an extremely compelling lecturer and teacher. And so these are the tools that APS wants you to have to be successful in your career. Well, friends, here we are. The world of Zoom, brought to us by a pandemic. As we negotiate this world, I'm sure you have been spending hundreds of hours on Zoom and other platforms. As a result, you are one of these people in the Hollywood squares, and you are also from time to time designing and giving presentations. So, friends, I have to say, that I've actually found this world of COVID and this world of remote presentations to be a double-edged sword, because there's certainly some negatives that we're all experiencing. For example, we're often physically isolated, we're often alone, and frankly, as Homo sapiens, as we discussed earlier, we thrive on human interaction and the rich experience of colleagues. And sitting in our apartments and sitting in our houses, we don't have that any longer. Also, I will say online platforms are sensorially disappointing. We have relatively low-grade visual cues. We have sometimes thin audio cues. And worse than that, we are dependent on a telecommunications system in the United States that can be unpredictable and unreliable. Furthermore, we are in the same place every day. And one of the aspects of going to work or going to the university or going to the laboratory was simply the invigoration of putting yourself in a different physical environment, and we don't have that any longer. So these are certainly a lot of the negatives that are going to be weighing on you as you give online presentations of any kind. But I'll say that there are also some very important positives, and sometimes we ignore these. For example, there is a much lower barrier to visual connection now in this world. So now you really have no barrier to connecting with people and having quick and short and highly impactful conversations, as opposed to sending emails or calling people on the telephone. So people are doing more one-to-one connection on these platforms. That's positive. Also, I will tell you now, I have participated in 3 technical scientific conferences online, and one of the things that happened was that there is a huge reduction in travel costs and carbon impact. In one technical conference I was a part of, the North American Membrane Society, they in March had to pivot very quickly from a typical in-person meeting in Tucson, Arizona, to an entirely online meeting. Their budget typically for their in-person meeting was around $150,000, and the combination of registration fees and other revenue meant that the North American Membrane Society would make about $10,000 or $20,000 a year. This year, when they pivoted to an entirely online platform, their total costs for the meeting were under $27,000. Their total revenues were still around $100,000. So I will tell you, I think that meetings, many more technical meetings are going to be online affairs. Now, the other thing I would say, which most of you don't think about, is that this platform has actually made it much easier for people with physical and sensory impairments to participate actively and equally in the world of science. So we now have an ability for people who are mobility impaired to travel, because they don't have to travel, and hear things because they can amplify and clarify the sound in these platforms. So I will tell you, I don't think we're returning entirely to the quote unquote way it was before. If for nothing else, I think the cost savings and the carbon impacts of reducing scientific travel is going to make this a very attractive new way of doing work. We will still have travel, we will still go to some conferences, but I predict we're going to be doing a lot more of this. Okay, so if that's the case, for the rest of your careers, it is likely that, 1, you'll be giving technical presentations online, and by the way, many of those presentations will be recorded. You will also be doing job interviews online, and you will be attending technical conferences and meetings remotely. You will also be teaching online. You'll be leading discussions and arriving at group decisions online, all right? So you'll be connecting even with friends and family online, and I'm sure many of you who previously called family or Skyped family are now realizing that Zoom is a way to gather the entire family together. So in many respects, I think this is here to stay. So let's make the most of this platform, let's play to its strengths, and let's design our presentations and our environment so that we can mitigate as much as possible the weaknesses, all right? Let's start with your presentation. Now, a lot of this advice is the same whether or not you were standing in front of an audience or sitting in front of your laptop as I am now. But it's still advice that I think has huge impact on how your audience understands your material. For starters, your slides are typically the main visual element and the main means in which in a technical presentation, you are transferring concepts. You're trying to express and show concepts, okay? So the slides are the visual element and your voice is the main audio element. And that's the means of information transfer. So what we're typically doing is showing images and letting our voice speak for us. Now, as we discussed earlier in some of our discussions about your pitch, the level of detail and depth of content is highly dependent on what audience you're addressing. Remember, we talked last time about the 4 archetypes of audience members. There's some people who are very specifically focused on details. There's some people who want big vision. There's some people who want direct answers. There's some people who treasure and enjoy communal relationships. So understanding and designing your talk for those different audience types is important. But in this online forum, because you can't physically walk around the room, you now have to let your slides and let your voice give a much richer amount of satisfaction for your audience. You have to use visuals, use stories, and what I call mental rewards, little short gifts, little short things that help an audience enjoy the experience of sitting and listening to you. Now, another thing that we have to think about now is the use of physical breaks, stretches, and breathers. Literally, we are finding now that beyond about 90 minutes, it is very difficult for people to remain fully engaged in a presentation. So pacing and designing a set of activities so that you have periodic breaks is absolutely essential for maintaining an audience's attention. But in general, what we're doing here is asking ourselves the same set of strategic questions we were talking about in our earlier presentations, which is you as a communicator need to think in terms of your audience. What is their likely visual experience? What is their likely auditory experience? And how can you, as the presenter, make that experience easier for them? Because the easier it is for them, the better they will grasp your material. Now, we've talked in the past about the kind of elements of a presentation, and it is very obvious that in a scientific presentation, this first set of items, things and facts, content, the specific text, those things are what you focus on. But underlying that, and frankly, structuring that content needs to be the set of concepts that you are trying to relate and have the audience come to common understanding with you on, okay? And those concepts are the kind of key themes that you need to communicate in your presentation. Now, the final thing is how it all comes together, the story. How do you structure your presentation? How and why do you present information in a certain order? How do you present that information? As we learned earlier, psychologically and neurologically, the Homo sapiens brain responds to stories, it responds to narrative. So how do you create narrative structure in the course of describing a technical presentation with some sort of technical results? Now, we use design. We start with content. What are the facts? What are the figures? What specific things are we trying to express? But once we have that content, we have to think about the audience's cognition and how they receive this information. This information might be extremely familiar to you, in fact, but you need to think of it in terms of the audience, many of whom are encountering this information for the first time. So you need to think in terms of design. How do you order things and create and simplify your visual and text representations so that your audience has tractability, that they don't panic, that they don't lose their place, and that they feel anxiety and thus detach from you as a speaker. The final element is creativity. How can you take all this great content that you have, a thoughtful approach to design, and inject something that people are going to be excited by, that people are going to be stimulated by, challenged by, surprised by? That third element of creativity is what often turns a good talk into a great talk. And of course, what we're talking about is visual communication. Because in addition to your voice, you need to make your slides work for you. This is a common theme we'll talk about today. Your slides need to work for you, the speaker. Visual communication is simply design that communicates a concept, idea, process, or statistic using text, graphics, illustration, form, and function with the goal of creating awareness and understanding in order to produce a change in belief or actions in your audience. That's ultimately what we're trying to do here. We're trying to change our audience's understanding of something in any of the presentations we give. And in fact, visual communication, this tool that we use, PowerPoint, is a marvelous tool because we can actually use a way of presenting the same material in a way that evokes certain reactions by fades, by dark backgrounds. We can visually focus people. We can also give people a sense of pace. We can also surprise people. We can keep people engaged with the strategic use of silences. In many respects, design is one of the most valuable tools a scientist has, because with design, she can take complex ideas and create visual forms that are familiar to their audience and enable people to understand things better. This slide that I'm showing you here was actually done by a graphic designer, and it just illustrates some of the key examples of design. The world of design is rich, and frankly, there could be a 20-part workshop on visual communication and the art of scientific communication. But let me just show you in this slide a few features that are showing you kind of how design works. We have a concept over here, design, with a set of visual elements. Then we have a process. We have a direction of the slide from left to right in the same direction that we read. We have objects represented here with very simple geometries. Then we have a vector here that it sort of evokes and connotes a process. And then we have a new state, a state that visually resembles this, but looks somewhat different. There are even very small elements. See what this designer did by creating these negative spaces? These are simple circles with the same color of the background, but now they look like essentially places and holes in this object. Even this small, subtle change in the arrow in PowerPoint is a flat back, but they added a circle in the same color as the visual background to give this curve so that the back of the arrow reads on the shape of the object here, and then to transmit your vector in your direction this way. Now, these seem like very small things, but as you study and explore the world of design, you'll understand how it helps audiences translate complex subjects into resolvable, understandable ideas that they can embrace. So in this respect, animation is your friend, and animation can help you keep your audience on track. You need to use animation to pace your viewer's experience. You need to deliver the text as you are saying it, because you want your voice and you want your presence as the presenter to be the main focus of attention, and you want the text and the words and the images to reinforce you as the presenter. Now, in science in particular, we often have some complexity that we need to describe, multi-step processes, etc. And this is a place where sequential diagrams and animations can be enormously helpful for your audience to understand exactly what the key steps were in a process. Step-by-step descriptions are extremely important to solidify your audience's understanding of what you did, for example, in an experiment. And the reason that's important is if they don't understand it, they feel an erosion of trust in you, which gets back to some of the earlier concepts we were talking about in the previous workshop. System one thinking, the sort of instinctive base thinking that Homo sapiens are operating on most of the time, relies on trust, and trust comes out of understanding. There's some very simple things that I recommend in a technical presentation, including what I call data reveals, to show a set of conditions before a change of state, and then to hold off on revealing the result of that change of state until after. And I'll show you an example of that. Not only does it anchor the result in the minds of your audience, but it's a small story of just a few seconds, but can end up giving a beginning, an emotional sort of anxiety or tension that needs to be resolved, and then a resolution of that tension. And then I generally recommend that transitions between slides and transitions within slides utilize very simple transitions, appears and fades. And you can use appear and you can use fade to signal tone and pace. having a bunch of things quickly come in sequence on a slide can help an audience appreciate fast pace, or fading from idea or object to object can slow down the pace and give the audience a sense of greater reflection. Now let me give you an example. So this is a diagram that a colleague of mine has used for a particular air conditioning system. It's an air conditioning system that uses a liquid desiccant to strip moisture out of the air. It dries the air and makes the air more comfortable. And what my colleague was doing was trying to give this diagram to show that you have an air conditioning section here, and you have these arrows signaling humid air coming outside into the air conditioner. And then over here, we use the liquid desiccant that strips the water out of the air. We need to regenerate that desiccant by using a heating system and a heat exchanger. And so this diagram was present, the static diagram was present in his talk for years. And what I realized was this diagram was not helping him explain the process. In fact, one key clue that your slides are not working for you is you have to use the cursor. When you use the cursor, or even when you use a laser pointer, what you are telling the audience is that I need to now direct you within the slide. Rather than the slide serving my purposes, I am now serving the slide's purpose. I am pointing to objects to tell you what these things are at various times. Now, I know that seems like, yeah, well, that's what you should do. Let's think about this a different way. Can we take this complex process diagram and give an explanation that utilizes animation and helps the audience understand the process better? I think we can. So what I did is I said, look, you've got two basic processes here. You got the conditioner and you got the regenerator. So let's start with each of these objects separately and explain what they are. And let's use very simple geometries. We start with the conditioner side. It takes outside air and takes it into the conditioner. And then what we do is in that conditioner, we add a liquid desiccant. That desiccant flows down through the system, and what comes out is drier air. Pretty simple, huh? But now we need to describe the rest of the system. And now we have a regenerator. And the regenerator takes the dilute liquid desiccant and puts it into this system. And I've put these stripes here to indicate heat. And the outside air goes into this heater, and we then pull the moisture off the liquid desiccant, and we put it into the air, and the air leaves wet, and the desiccant is then returned back to the system. And in order to make the system efficient, we put in a heat exchanger so that we can take some of the heat from one cycle and put it back into the other part of the cycle. I basically given you the same diagram as before, but I've walked you through the process step by step using only the standard animation tools that exist in PowerPoint. And what I hope to show you is that using step-by-step things like this helps your audience understand. The other thing I like, and I commonly recommend, is that you use an ample amount of images. Visual images are enormously intuitive for people, and they can help express and explain what the key details of this process are. For example, this is the air conditioning unit, and I explain that the conditioner and the regenerator both have these fuzzy plates. I use words like fuzzy, not plates with fibrous tissue of 4 millimeters in depth that wicks the water, but I try to utilize common language. And I try to show that the wicks on the plates themselves are wet. I even press my hand up against the air conditioner to show the stripes of wetness. So I'm trying to give an audience member who has no familiarity with liquid desiccant air conditioning some understanding of how the process works and what it looks like. Another subject I've talked about is data reveals. It is often the case that you present data wham in one step. And what you fail to do in this case is give some narrative climax that helps the audience understand the profound difference of your research. So in this case, what I'm going to do is show you 3 graphs that show you the first 7 months out of the year, And you don't know what this is, it's millions of gallons flush, but you kind of see that in general, things go up, okay? They go up with time. I don't know if that's good or bad, but what I'm now gonna do is tell you that after we implemented a new water treatment system, the next year, we saw very steady performance with no increase in the summer months. That is the basic example of a data reveal. I'm holding back that last data until I explain and I show you the result. That right there, excuse me, I think we had a little, that right there is an example of a data reveal and a very small story. It lasts 15 or 20 seconds, but it is very compelling for an audience and helps them understand and emotionally connect with the technical subject that you're presenting. Now, in general, data representation can take place in many forms. And so I simply suggest that you think carefully about what the underlying point is in the data that you are presenting. Do you want to show, for example, a decline in something bad or good with time? If so, designing your data fields and showing the data declining as you move your eye from left to right makes a lot of sense. In contrast, the same data could be presented in ascending, as something that is negative is getting less negative, or something that is missing is filling up. The same data set, but with a different orientation of the axis to connote a different quality to the result. You could also choose instead to talk about variances and talk about how variances are improving with time. This too is the same data set, but it simply is focusing on different issue, a range of data as opposed to magnitude. And then finally, you can have a cumulative thing where you set the same data sets in a format whereby you see with each successive attempt, you're getting better and better, closer and closer ranges of a data set. These four data sets, these four slides I just showed you are all exactly the same data, but I chose different orientations of the graph to communicate to the audience different qualities of the result. What you don't do is this. This is a real slide from one of my colleagues at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and it shows a wonderful cornucopia of technical information. And as a speaker, when this slide comes up, your eye and your concentration immediately leaves the presenter. And you now, as an audience member, have to figure out this graph. You see a bunch of visual elements on the left. You see some visual elements on the right. I see this plus sign. I assume maybe this stuff here on the left kind of combines with the stuff on the right. I have this circle here. It's kind of in front of this thing. There's a lot of information here. Now, you may, as a speaker, have been talking for the last 15 seconds. I haven't heard a word you're saying. My mind and my eyes and my brain are trying to decipher this thing here. And I know the underlying inclination. I don't want you to do this, but I know why there's an underlying inclination. And that is that as a technical expert, you've got a lot of great stuff. You want to show people, got all this great stuff. And you know, it's hard to decide, well, maybe my audience will be interested in this. Maybe my audience will be interested in this thing, or maybe they'll be interested in this thing. Maybe they'll be interested in everything. I don't know. So I'm just going to throw it all out there. Okay. When you choose to do that, you're being like this guy, the seller at the bazaar. Okay. What the seller at the bazaar does is lay out all his beautiful gems, and he sits there all day, and people go walking by, and they have to look and see what is of interest to them. And they have to figure it out for themselves. And the man at the bazaar sits there and waits for the audience to decide what's important and then transacts. I have a suggestion for you. Don't ever be the man in the bazaar. You figure out, based on what you understand with the audience, what is most important to them. This is exactly what we were talking about in our last workshop, is by understanding better, by taking the time to understand the customer, we call this concept the customer segment, by understanding a class of individuals who have common needs, who have common goals, who have common concerns, you can do a better job in your presentation of saying, okay, for this audience, here are the things that matter to them. Because this is fundamentally what makes a great speaker. It's not great slides. It's not, great delivery or great tone of voice. It's simply empathy. It's thinking through what an audience might need. What do they hope to gain? What things are they trying to avoid? And then how can my presentation represent those ideas and guide them to an optimal solution or an optimal understanding of a situation? That is what makes an outstanding technical speaker. So just in summary, I have some kind of top PowerPoint storytelling tips. Okay, the first one, as I said, is it's important to deliver your text points sequentially. Have your text and images arrive as you discuss them. And this means that your slides are working for you. And in general, I will tell you, I don't mind having a lot of text on a slide, but what I don't like to see is having a huge thump of text appear on a slide, because that means the audience is going to stop listening to you and it's going to start listening and trying to read the slides, and then they're going to try to return to you. So sequence the pace of delivery of text. Use animation to show step-by-step processes. Use data reveals to enhance the storytelling and sort of dramatic tension as information was discovered. The concepts of design help you express complex ideas. So using color and size consistently with the right intuitive palette. When I say right intuitive palette, don't make hot objects blue or green and make cold objects red. I know that sounds silly, but you'd be shocked in a technical presentation how sometimes speakers don't think about common ideas, like what temperature might be reflected in a certain color, or what sensitivity or what hazard might be represented by some colors versus other colors. One thing that I commonly see tripping technical presenters up is the use of videos. Videos are very clumsy, and in the online world are particularly problematic because videos can demand a high amount of bandwidth, and they can become very, very choppy with frame rates as low as 1 frame, 2 frames a second, or even 1 frame a second. And at such a low frame rate, the video absolutely ceases to be understandable to your audience, also because the audio is cutting in around. So what I recommend is don't use videos in online presentations. Instead, use a series of still images and go through those still images, image, 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 image. Even though those series of still images will end up connoting and expressing visuals and motions, because they have single images, the bandwidth constraints will be much lower and you will have much greater control. You can even stop it midway through your stack of images and say, and here is where you see the phenomenology arising, right at this moment. And then you can continue blinking through those static images. And when appropriate, when it's useful, use summary boxes and other design elements to anchor key points in your slides. Now, another element to mastering the world of the online communication tools is simply to run effective meetings. Some of the communications you'll be doing on this platform are not technical presentations, they're going to be interactions. They're going to be points at which you and a team need to get something done. So one of the keys to making that effective online is the same key to making it effective in real life, and that is good planning. That is a PALO. Have you ever heard of the term PALO? P-A-L-O? It's very simple. It stands for 4 key elements to a successful meeting. First, establishing a purpose. Why is the meeting taking place and what needs to be accomplished? 2, A stands for agenda. Making sure that ahead of time you have given people a schedule and understanding of the organization of the meeting, what happens when, by whom, etc. Many times in the online forum, people can forget to discuss the logistics. You remember at the beginning of this presentation, Crystal pointed out to you that there was this orange arrow in the upper corner and that you could put in your questions, which, by the way, you should be putting in your questions. We welcome all your questions. But that is an example of a very simple use of logistics, helping people understand what is the platform we're going to be using? How am I going to be able to do things? When should I do things? What is the result at the end? Crystal also gave small logistics about, for example, you can expect that this recording of this video to be posted in 2 days' time. And then finally, outcome. Outcome, what do we hope to achieve, decide, or agree on at the end of this meeting? So I like to start all my meetings with a Palo. I simply run through the purpose, the agenda, the logistics, and the desired outcome from the meeting. It helps my audience members understand what we're trying to achieve together and know how far along we are in that process. Again, I'm trying to think of what helps my audience be effective in this environment. So in many respects, I think the basics of running a good online meeting are the same as the basics of running a good meeting. Prepare yourself and your participants in advance. Use the Palo, especially sending agendas ahead of time. Another good practice for online meetings is to establish roles of a facilitator and a technology steward. The facilitator should be the one who drives communication and makes sure that we have good engagement. And the technology steward should be watching and managing how the meeting is going. So one of the things that I recommend is the technology steward should be the one to look at the questions and answers. Let the facilitator gauge audience engagement, elicit responses from people as the meeting is going on, and let the technology steward focus on the accumulation of questions. The other thing a technology steward can do is tell the facilitator when they might be having technical difficulty. So the other thing we can do, the facilitator and the technology steward together can make sure that there's some teaser questions prepared in advance when it comes time for questions and answers. It's always important to plan for meeting notes and artifacts. Artifacts including, are we going to get a copy of the slides? When are we going to get a copy of the slides? PDFs of slides with the animations removed and simplified so all the text is revealed on a page are very appreciated by an audience. Because we are dealing with US telecommunications, we have to be prepared for challenges, and those challenges will happen. I think I've already seen one point on my presentation today where my audio dropped out. So we always have to establish what I call a bandwidth backup plan, even falling back on the Zoom telecommunication call number where you can reestablish the dialogue, even if you have lost the opportunity to have video. Another thing between the facilitator and the technology steward is to use your phones and make sure that you have a text communication between the two of you. Because then your technology steward can say, hey, wait a minute, Peter, we just lost you, stand by a second, and you're gonna have to repeat starting at X. And that, again, helps the audience reestablish connectivity. And then a final element to a good meeting is simply thinking about what went well, evaluating what didn't go well, and then modifying your processes moving forward. Seek feedback and evaluation. You will become a better speaker. You'll also become a better facilitator. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the literal showing up. So because online media focuses us to use these cameras and the microphones, we have to be thoughtful about how to optimize these tools, again, for the audience's benefit. So in the audio, how can we make our voice as clear as possible with a minimum of distortion and echo? For one thing, never use the speaker on your laptop. Always use some form of microphone, either earbuds like I have in, or something similar. Same thing with a visual. How can I make these surroundings as undistracting as possible? And in some cases, depending on where some of you are working right now, you may actually have to maintain some privacy. There might be literal distractions around you. In our technical meetings, we have had people give a technical talk at 2 o'clock in the morning, in a boba shop in Hong Kong, and that's when they had to give their technical talk. And so thinking about what's the environment around you and can you predict that are important things. So it's always good to test and evaluate your equipment. Ask a friend to jump on a practice Zoom call. Make sure that she can see your background, she can see the lighting of your face, and give you feedback and advice. So let's go back to this. This is a screenshot I took from a Zoom meeting I was having with 4 colleagues. It was somewhat informal, but we were going through some information. My friend Jen is in her apartment, and I just noticed here that she had a bright object and a bright light behind her, and that most of her face was illuminated by the screen, which ended up kind of not being as flattering a color of light. My friend Jim down here, Jim had his large screen up above his laptop, and so the laptop camera is looking up at Jim's chin, and Jim isn't actually looking at the camera. And Rishi had, again, a bright window behind him, and he had somewhat conspicuous white earbuds. And I'm not perfect, but let me show you why I chose the layout and the format to my environment, okay? What I am trying to do is create an environment where you can see me easily. So first off, where is your camera? Okay, place your camera so that it appears to be looking directly at the audience members, because this is what we would be doing if we were talking together, just like if we were speaking. Avoid bright backlighting and avoid bright objects in the background. Okay, I'm good there. Also avoid QAnon mugs and any other, weird, odd, or distracting visual elements behind you. Here's another example that I did a screenshot from a presentation a couple weeks ago, and my colleague Eric was talking to his main screen, but his laptop computer and his laptop camera is somewhere else. This is not as effective for an audience member to be looking at Eric, giving his presentation, looking in another direction. Now, in Zoom and now with some of the other platforms, you have an opportunity to change your background. And I know it's kind of fun to think, oh, well, I don't have to be Peter Fiske sitting in a room. I can be Peter Fiske on the Starship Enterprise. And okay, it's fun. But here's one of the distractions I find with this, is that Zoom actually has a really crappy algorithm for sorting out a human face versus the background. And you end up with these weird wavy kind of edges to my hair, and it can actually change. And I find it actually visually kind of distracting to have that sort of shimmer or waviness around my head. Also, when I step away from the camera, it can actually lose track of my head, and so I can suddenly disappear and reappear. Also, oval objects like a balloon sitting next to me, the algorithm is so stupid that if I had a balloon next to me, it would actually think it's a head and you suddenly see a balloon. So the worst of all, I find, is the video. And on Zoom, you have the tropical beach video, and then you have the Aurora Borealis video. Friends, it's just distracting. So just keep it simple. Keep it simple. And as much as possible, it's okay to have your natural world behind you, but think about how it is going to be received by people. Here's Megan. She's got a nice bunch of books behind her. I might have Megan's face a little bit closer to the camera. In the case of Jerome is again speaking to a different camera that's not where, he's speaking to a screen, but that's not where the camera is, and ends up looking for an audience member like he's not connecting with me. So in general, my advice is just to keep it simple, as in all things. Position your camera and zoom in so we can see your face, center yourself in the field of view, and unless you have a totally distracting or unsuitable background environment, skip the fake backgrounds and video backgrounds. So here's my setup. And what I've got here is I set it up in my bedroom, both for privacy, but also because I have a nice window with lots of indirect light. And that then can flood my face and give you guys a good illumination of my face. I also don't have a lot of any bright objects behind me. Now, I am sitting here in front of my laptop and I'm a little bit higher, but for me, going through and touching the laptop and keying through my slides is easiest for me to keep ergonomically stable this way. I also chose to use a high quality plug-in microphone and earbuds. So I invested the money to have this nice high quality mic because I want to, as much as possible, make it the audio signal to you as clean as possible. And also notice I'm using a direct jack. Bluetooth headphones, Bluetooth speakers, I find, can sometimes have a decline in audio quality, and they can also have connectivity issues. So I just go for the tried and true coaxial jack. Makes it nice and reliable. Okay, that is the world we are in now. And I'll just wrap up by saying Zoom and its alternatives are here to stay. We're going to be doing a lot more of this even after the coronavirus is put in its place. This is why design is so important. Design is a critical tool for helping your audience understand you and your technical message. Visual design of slides absolutely helps in speed cognition and understanding, and animation can be helpful in guiding people through complexity. I also always recommend a generous use of images. Images are evocative, they're pleasurable for people to see, they're a lot easier to understand than text. Now, in any meeting, effective meetings are a function of preparation and communication. So also, when you are setting up any of these environments, simply set up your presentation space to maximize your audience's experience. Again, think in terms of what your audience needs. It's hard being alone. It's hard being stuck in your apartment. As a presenter, everything you can do to make your audience feel more connected to you can help them enjoy your talk better, enjoy your interactions better, and enjoy this difficult time we're facing. All right, that's it. As you know, you can always find my advice in articles in Nature magazine. And in the final minutes that we have here today, I'm going to invite Crystal to open it up for questions and find out what questions the audience has. So Crystal, what questions have come up in the time that we've talked together today?
Yeah, Peter, we got some great questions coming in. So first, so one question is, often when you're doing a presentation that is recorded, it also serves an archival purpose and must be readable, communicate well without the actual presence of the speaker. Are there specific recommendations that you have for these kinds of presentations?
Yes. So one of the challenges in a Zoom recording is that the slides themselves are now a portion of the screen, and your little thumbnail of your presentation, yourself presenting, is a portion of the screen. So in these ways, what I recommend is try to make visual elements as big as possible. So instead of having a slide with a title and then the graph in there, have a title and the graph, and then the next slide be just the graph, so that will expand the view of the graph or the view of the visual element, so people will see as much as possible of just that visual element. So that's one basic way in which a recorded presentation can then have much greater attractability because people can just simply see things better. And then everything else we've discussed, the ways in which you thoughtfully lay out and design your slides, and the ways in which you give your presentation. Another thing is, I will tell you, I don't know how many of you really struggle with this, but I don't have great bandwidth, even where I live in the Bay Area. And so there are times when I might choose to go to a neighbor's yard. Literally, I've been to a neighbor's backyard who has much better bandwidth than I have, and I've given my presentation then, because I know that the recording is going to be lasting for a long time, and I want to make sure that I had the best bandwidth possible when I made that recording. So those are things that I think about in appreciating that the recording is going to live on after my presentation. Great question.
Yeah, absolutely. And a related question, it was a great example that you showed of, how a graphic designer might do something, and I can attest to their immense skill because my husband is a graphic designer. But what if any one of our dear audience members is like, I am not a graphic designer. I don't have access to one. How do I incorporate some of these elements of design? What is a resource for me? How do I do that?
It's a great question. And I would simply say I have been studying it by going online. I have listened to YouTube presentations about visual design in conveying technical information. There are some famous books by Tufte that talk about the art of scientific communication. And in those books, he has some very evocative descriptions of how to lay out data to convey so much information with a single visual element. And I would simply say, visual design is like any skill. There's a lot to learn. And you don't have to be a pro, just like you don't have to be a pro in differential equations from the start. It involves practice. It involves getting some basic ideas that you like. And I would say also, visual design is not like, there's not a correct way and a whole bunch of incorrect ways. Your style and your approach to communication can be natural to you. And so I'd simply say use visual design to reinforce the elements that you feel maximize your impact with the audience. So for example, one of the things I do, which some visual designers strongly recommend against, is give a lot of text on the slide. I have many slides which are all text, but one of the reasons I do that is I know that slides will live on after me, right? And I know that if somebody gets a PDF of my slides and all they have are a bunch of images, they have no information to understand the underlying messages, okay? So these are things that I try to do to utilize design, but do it in a way that's adapted to what I think is necessary. And again, your mileage may vary, your approach might be different. But in general, I find it's always a good approach to simply ask yourself, what is my audience's experience in the slide? With each of your slides, put the slide up and say, if I don't know about this background, this material, what is my eye drawn to? What is the key message or element in this slide? And then how is my design either reinforcing that or distracting from that key message? And that's, honestly, the fundamentals of design are empathy. That's really all it is. But that's a great question, Crystal. Thanks very much. I will also say before we go on, is that you think you don't have access to a designer? Really? You just ask around, whether you're at a university, whether you're at a national lab or a company. Most of the time, technical communicators, it's not that they lack the access to a designer. They simply don't know if they already have one on staff somewhere. And honestly, people who are in communications departments love it when a technical professional comes to them and asks for advice. It's really fantastic feedback you can get from those people. So thank you for that question.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, folks, we're out of time. We do have a couple more questions, but we're out of time for the actual official webinar today. I apologize. So yeah, I'm happy to. The couple of follow-up questions that are coming in. Where will the recording be made available? If you have registered for this, which you have because you're here, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar in 2 days' time with the link with this recording attached to it. So that's one place that you'll get the recording. And there's also if the summer webinar series page, which I shared earlier in the chat, we link to all of the YouTube videos for recordings for that series. So you can get all of Peter's videos of all his webinars he's done for us, and also a few extra webinars that we've done as part of the series. Someone was also asking about the PDF slides for today's presentation, Peter. Is that something you would be willing to share?
Absolutely. And so I will give a PDF version to Crystal.
Yeah.
But what I'd suggest is you reach out to Crystal directly if you want access to that.
Yes, absolutely. You can just email me directly. Another thing I could consider doing is just sending it to the list of registrants. But either way will work. Okay, so that's it for today. One last thing, as you exit this webinar today, please take a moment to fill out the survey. It's just like 4 questions, but it really helps us improve our ability to provide these services to you.
Yeah, it helps me know what is the most valuable information, and I will be adapting these presentations and giving them again. So I appreciate any feedback you have.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you, Peter, for another great presentation.
You bet, Crystal. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
All soon. American Physical Society, copyright 2020, all rights reserved.